I have gotten really good at being grounded in the groundlessness.
In my experience, mindfulness and meditation and cultivating a connection with nature is what helps me find grounding amidst the groundlessness and the chaos that comes with life. And that's what we talk about in today's episode with Eleanor Medina. Eleanor is a holistic nature therapist, and she shares all about how meditating with nature, and in particularly the moon, can reconnect us to ourselves, spirituality, and the natural world. Eleanor shares about the power of nature therapy and our moon cycles and how our body's natural cycles mirror the natural world, as well as how nature can connect us to spirituality and what that means for our well-being. But before we get started, let's take a moment to ground together with 3 deep breaths. Take a moment to notice where your body touches the earth. Soften your gaze or gently rest your eyes. And let the shoulders relax down the back. Take a big breath in. Exhale, let it all out. Again, inhale, fill your chest, fill your belly with air. Exhale, open your mouth, let it all go. One more inhale. And exhale. And return to that connection to the earth. And open your eyes as you return to this space. Eleanor and I just started this call talking in Spanish, so I'm already so excited for all the places and unexpected turns this conversation can take. But I know of Eleanor through a mutual friend, and I started to engage with her work. She has a wonderful podcast, and Eleanor, you'll have to remind me the name of it, but it's Meditations with Moon Cycles. So it's these meditations that go along with the moon cycle, and I'm ready to and excited to just dive into the moon cycle today.
Thank you so much,
Mhm.
Holly. It's so great to be with you, really. I am so grateful that Preston connected us and feel really honored to talk with you. We can start absolutamente with Mindfulness with the Moon.
Mm,
That's the name of the podcast series, Mindfulness with the Moon.
mhm.
And we just had a full moon
Yes, that's why I
recently.
feel like this is perfect timing for our conversation today.
And the cool thing is, we're gonna have another new moon and another full moon and another new moon and
Mm-hmm.
another full moon, and the cycles keep going, right? And those are
Yeah.
just sort of the ones that we tend to, or at least I tend to pay most attention to. But we
Mm-hmm.
get to follow the cycles through all of it,
Yeah.
and if we want to, if we choose to, and I find that that can be helpful.
Yeah. How did you first begin engaging with the moon cycles and noticing the benefits of working with it?
Mm. Well, one thing I'd like for us to bring into the conversation, which is something that I talk about in Mindfulness with the Moon, which is a lesson that I learned from a teacher of mine named Robin Wall Kimmerer. She wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and
I've heard so much about that book, but I haven't read it yet.
it's a wow, and it's
Mm-hmm.
also dense, but really poetic and beautiful too.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the aspects that she brings up is calling aspects of nature him or her
Mm.
instead of it. Because when
Mm-hmm.
we refer to the moon as it, it's an object. We're objectifying and acting like it's not real.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the invitations that I have for us today is to say, how did you start following the moon cycles and paying attention to her? Because la luna
Absolutely.
en
Mm-hmm.
español, por ejemplo, is a la is feminine and luna ends with an A. And so,
Mm-hmm.
in most cultures, there's that kind of relation. So, I started, and I appreciate your question as well, but I started engaging with her, gosh, for a long time. It feels, I don't know if I could put a date, but I would always notice that things would feel differently around the full moon. For example, this last full moon, my cat was up all night long, meowing
Animals tell
all night
us what
long.
is going on. My dog Luna
Uh,
is always way barkier at the full moon. I can notice.
yes. And so having that awareness, right? I love that your dog's name's Luna too. That's a very, very
Very
much in
fitting.
line. Very fitting. Exactly. So I noticed that, I mean, the moon controls the tides. I mean, let's just
Mm-hmm.
be point blank about it. And we are 70 to 80% water. And so if we don't think that our water bags, also known as bodies, are not influenced by the moon, I think we're really missing something of extraordinary value.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing the moon into the conversation has been a big part of my practice for a long time personally. And then mindfulness with the moon came about because I was in a 2 year mindfulness meditation teacher training
Mm-hmm.
with some incredible teachers. Jack Cornfield and Tara Brock were the leaders of this program.
Amazing
And
teachers.
it was fantastic. I would recommend the program to everyone. In this program, we had to come up with what's called a practicum. Two practicums, one halfway through and then another where we teach the lessons that we've learned. And I thought, well, I'm really interested in the moon and the moon cycles. Why don't I create a meditation series that's linked to the moon that is 29 days? We're using a synodic month or synodic month. There's a couple ways to say it. Where we look at the moon cycle in 29 days from new moon to new moon again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of different schools of thought, but that's the one that I was working with. Also was working with an amazing astrologer who you can also link named David McConaughey.
Okay.
And Ayurveda Dave is what he goes by. And he was really supporting me. I don't know a lot of the logistics about what's happening with the moon. All I know is that I feel energetically different based on what's
Mm-hmm.
happening in the moon. And I wanted to learn more about that. So I share a little bit about the moon in the podcast and a lot about mindfulness meditation, but
Mm-hmm.
linking it to the cycles of her because we're not disconnected from the earth. We're intimately connected. And having those reminders in 29 days to create a meditation practice consistently was something that I knew was going to be supportive to me. And then if I think it's going to be supportive to me, then I think it's typically going to be supportive for people who I love in my life
Mm-hmm.
and the people who are also
Absolutely.
looking for support as well, who are able to find the
Yeah.
podcast.
I think it's great that you pointed out referring to Moon as it versus her. That's one way in which we distance ourselves from the natural world and start to see humans as separate
That's
from
right.
nature. But
That's
humans are
right.
not separate from nature. We are nature. So,
Yes.
starting with that language, that's a great way to reconnect. And I think a lot of what I've been exploring this past year is a lot of healing through reconnecting to nature and doing
Mm-hmm.
things just like you said of like tracking the moon cycle and working with her. And then what a beautiful idea
Yes.
incorporating our meditation practice with that. That's like such a great
Yes.
place to start for meditation and for this deeper relationship we're cultivating with the natural world and this other part of ourself that we're often disconnected from.
Exactly. Beautifully said. So beautifully said. Yeah, this idea that we are separate from nature, that she is not intimately a part of who we are, is part of why we're so sick
Mm-hmm.
in our world and in the US culture and in the Western culture. A lot of Western cultures are experiencing this ecological grief, this disconnection, because when we're disconnected from the earth, we're disconnected from ourselves and we're disconnected from each other, and
Mm-hmm.
the cycle goes on.
Yeah.
So part of the work to reconnect, which is also incredible work by Joanna Macy, who is also in this nature world. She is just a leader in working to reconnect people back to the planet, because
Mm-hmm.
that, I believe, is the most simple and clear way for us to start to move towards healing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So you're a nature therapist, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
I
So I'm
am.
curious, with being a nature therapist and with this course you created about mindfulness meditation with the moon, has that, I guess maybe first starting for listeners, do you mind sharing what is nature therapy and
Mm-hmm.
what that practice looks like? How is that different from a regular therapy session that people are more familiar with in their minds?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, what are the differences of that? And then, do you incorporate working with the moon in your nature therapy sessions? Is that an element you see play out with clients?
Mm. Yeah, beautiful questions. So, nature therapy, it started very much like it sounds when I launched my private practice, where I was seeing people in nature. Because, I mean, I'm asking people to be present in our sessions, and the most normal and comfortable way for us to be present is when we feel the wind on our skin, when we hear the birds chirping in the background, when we feel the earth sitting, feeling ourselves seated on the earth and our grounding connection to her, when we are able to look at the squirrels that are chasing each other around. I mean, what when we're looking at the dogs walking by, it's like that is what I'm teaching. So I want to put people in the most healing, most presencing place in the world, not in like a stale office. During COVID, I mean, this is kind of there's a roundabout thing here, but during COVID, I went online, and then my husband John and I moved to Mexico, and we were traveling all over Mexico, and I was exploring totally different lands. And really, when I moved to Mexico, I started following the moon cycle because I was having a really hard time.
Hmm.
And somehow, I mean, there were some beautiful moments, but it was also extremely difficult. And so, tracking the moon cycle, I would have these little ceremonies for myself of deep prayer, of like, okay, it's the new moon. I need help. I need support. I'm feeling chaotic and lost. Luna, will you come down and will you offer me your guidance, and will you allow for me to trust in these ebbs and flows that come with the tides of life, because I need you. And so
Mm-hmm.
then while we were living in Mexico, I recorded mindfulness with the moon and was doing all of these practices and learning and in this program. And now I'm back in Colorado, just arrived here a couple of days ago, which is where I'm from. And so I want to be doing more in person stuff in nature again, because I kind of got away from that for a little while. Like for a while, I'm sitting in front of clients, talking, having sessions, and I'm in front of my computer for 10 to 12 hours a day. And I'm like, wait a minute, I started as a nature therapist. Like, how did this happen?
Mm-hmm.
And not like it's happening to me, but how did I choose this? And how can I also get back to seeing people in in nature, in the rain, snow, sun, and learn the lessons and slow down with her.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing about how working with the moon was a support for you during a challenging time, right? I think that when we're talking about how we relate to the natural world, looking at the changes in nature, like looking at the changes in the weather, looking at the changes in the moon, can be a great reminder that what we experience internally is going to fluctuate and change too. So I'm
Yes.
curious, was that like an element that was supportive for you during that time? And did you notice
Mm-hmm.
your internal energy shifting in relationship, like in a, I guess, did it line up over time with the relationship of the moon? Did you notice like the new moon, you had a certain energy, the full moon, you had a certain energy? Did you notice how that correlated to what you were feeling inside? And I guess for people listening, is there a general energy that's associated with the new moon and the full moon that they can keep in mind as they're working with this?
Great questions. Yes. So I think that the biggest overarching tool that has been helpful is learning to go with the flow.
Mm-hmm.
My husband John says ride the ride. Like, and there's no right or wrong energy based on the different moon cycles, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, I talk about this in Mindfulness with the Moon, and there typically the new moon is seen as darkness, death, dying type of energy. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's no light that can be seen typically. And so it's this time of going underground and doing a lot of the deeper inter interpersonal and external work, inter and external work that allows for us to really be with the darkness. And
Mm-hmm.
then as the phase continues, you start to see more and more of the light. And then of course the full moon is when it's the brightest. And typically David McConaughey says it's like hot girl summer, you know, like woo, everything's just like bright and so much energy, and the dogs are barking more, and you know, my
Mm-hmm.
cat's sprinting around the house, and things feel chaotic and overflowing, and you maybe want to listen to music louder than you had, and things are in full bloom,
Mm-hmm.
and it's summer, and and then it starts to wane the other direction, and we then go back into the darkness again, and then go into rebirth
Mm-hmm.
in the winter, and then the cycle continues like that, you know, where we go
Mm-hmm.
underground and we connect and we get quiet. And the other really beautiful thing that I've been learning about the moon is how my period is connected with the moon
Yes.
cycle.
We can't not go into this right now.
Right? Of
Such a key
course.
component. Yeah.
Such a key component. And you know, one
Mm-hmm.
thing that's been really curious to me is following and tracking my cycle in tandem with the moon and seeing how that's been really supportive to me. This is who we are. Like, this is the most natural part of being a woman, is shedding and staying in cycle with the moon, and having my own cycle has allowed for me to also pay more attention to the cycles of nature, to the cycles of the moon, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's another really strong parallel. There's a group of women who, throughout this last year, we've been doing different circles around the new and full moon. And it's been pretty interesting because, like, half of us are synced with the new moon and the other half are synced with the full moon. And we've been like, when are we all
Yes.
just going to sync up? But it really is an interesting relationship to look at as well, as like, here's this energy in the world around me that's happening, and then there's this other internal energy too, and finding the way they work together. But I really
Mm-hmm.
find when I look at processing life and things that help me, seeing things in cycles is so helpful. I think in the Western world, we think so much of like linear growth and like things in
Yes.
lines and boxes all the time, but that's not
Right.
the way it works. So when, we're working towards a goal or moving through a challenge, remembering that it's like a cycle too, and a cycle is whole. So like even in those
Mm-hmm.
moments of the darkness, like there's still some of that light there because it's a whole cycle, and in that real
Yes.
light there's like space to find that rest and that steadiness too, and knowing that like just because I'm in this phase, I'm not going to be there forever, and I'll never not be here again. Like we're going to repeat this and have a chance to come back and
Mm-hmm.
approach these, not the same but similar emotions and things that might come up again and again and again. And then it can
Yes.
become about being a constant practice, first being like, I must get it right this time. And then now that I've accomplished it, I'll get it right every time from now on. It's like, well, we're probably going to
Right.
keep like revisiting this, and it's going to be really different every time. And sometimes we'll be proud of the way we moved through it. And next time we might be like, okay, there's still some work to do there. And when I take that mindset, I find my inner talk is much softer. And when I don't approach it that way, that Mean Girl soundtrack goes on in my head, and I'm much more critical of the way I'm engaging with the world and myself.
Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah, noticing those internal families that have things to
Mm-hmm.
share. That's one of the modalities that I use in my practice. I love that you're speaking to the parts of ourselves. Internal family systems is one of the approaches that I take IFS, and it's just that. It's the mean girl tape, and it's also the compassionate, you're doing the best that you can, for real you are.
Mm-hmm.
And in the cycles, sometimes we're proud of the way that we're doing it, and other times we're not so much. And that allows for us to pivot and for us to get clear on what we do want and what we don't want. And, one way to get clear is through sitting in meditation. And so that's what mindfulness with the moon is about. It's getting clear and getting quiet every single day as a devotional practice to come back to ourselves, to come back to our center, which takes practice. It takes mindfulness to know what's happening with our period cycle and to know what's happening with our moon cycle. And I've actually heard recently women saying, my moon cycle, talking about
Mm-hmm.
their period.
Mm-hmm.
My moon is coming. And I think that's really fascinating too. And so I think weaving all of these different aspects together for me has been, specifically with seated meditation, has impacted absolutely everything in my life and has allowed for me to be more trusting of the ebbs and the flows, of the expansions and the contractions that the cycle brings with the light and the dark. And the better that and more easily we can do this, even when things are, I mean, this moon cycle was extremely hard too. It's not like, oh, when I was in Mexico it was hard. It was like this moon cycle I was like, okay, this has been a ride, and I'm going to say some prayers to the moon to support me. And my prayers look like dedications. Like, I want to be here. I want to see. I want to know. Show me the way. Guide me. Because she is a guide for
Mm-hmm.
me, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. When I tend to take in information about the moon, And when I try to work with her, I often hear thinking of the new moon as like this time to plant seeds and like dig in the
Mm-hmm.
soil. Like, what is that deep intention? What do we want to work with? And seeing the full moon as like, okay, like how did that seed grow? You know, it's not just going to be done here, but like it's in a fullness now. Is it now that we shine some light onto this thing and put it out into the world in a different way? Um,
Right.
so I'm curious, as you worked with the moon and particularly in mindfulness with the moon, what what was that experience like for you when you really sat down and meditated with the moon every day? Did you notice anything particularly arising physically, you know, working with your moon cycle in that? Did you notice changes in your witnessing of it? Did you notice differences mentally? And how did that practice help cultivate this deeper relationship? And is it something you continue, or are there elements that weave in because you've really established those seeds?
Mm. There's so much here. So I use that analogy in mindfulness with the moon of planting the
Mm,
seed in the new moon, and then it comes to flowering in the full moon, and then it goes back to dies and goes back to the earth. And so I love that you bring that. And
mm-hmm,
so each each podcast is a 10 or so minute Dharma talk about something. It's about the moon cycle and a mindfulness Buddhist based practice. And talking a lot about meditation and the reason for meditation and why we do it and what that looks like, and working with fear and trauma, and working with difficult emotions and the tides of life, and the being our own inner refuge. I mean, there's all these different teachings that come through, and then also just basic ones like what is the moon, and what is meditation, and what is mindfulness, and why do we do it? Like, what's the point?
mm-hmm,
So it goes from like very basic at the beginning to very in depth
mm-hmm,
throughout the 29 days. So I have a Dharma talk, and writing those Dharma talks was incredible. I mean, I would look at notes from Jack and Tara, and I would pull what resonated for me and then relate it to the moon. And then I would record the spoken Dharma talk and then a 20-minute lightly guided meditation with my husband John's music behind
mm,
every single track. But I was really in it. I was recording it with the moon every single day. And I would wake up, I'd have a day where I was in tears and I was feeling very raw and very sensitive, and I would still record that day and bring that forward. I would
mm-hmm,
have days where I have so much energy and I feel great, and it does feel like the full moon, and that's wonderful. Um,
mm-hmm.
for example, and it just sort of went like that.
That's really beautiful. I have a background in Ashtanga yoga. Like when
Mm-hmm.
I was deep in Ashtanga, and
Mm-hmm.
there I just there's so much beauty. Now I don't practice Ashtanga, but I have a very steady meditation practice every morning. And I think so much of it reminds me of Ashtanga, where it's you show up. And like,
Yes.
regardless of the internal weather, regardless of what's happening within you or around you, the practice isn't about what you do, but it's about that showing up and being there for your fullness and all of it. So I really think there's so much beauty we get for just showing up to something again and
Yep.
again, day after day. That consistency and that steadiness allows us to be with and witness such a wider range. And it's so easy to fall out of that, like, oh, I'm crying today and I don't want to sit. I don't want to record a podcast about a meditation right now. That's not what it's supposed to be like, but that's
Mm-hmm.
what it is. And that's when we
Yes.
can really find this deeper connection and healing. So I think the fact that you were these weren't pre-recorded, like they were you in real time doing this practice, doing this work with the moon gives another depth and layer that people can connect with. And when I
Mm-hmm.
just like think about Ashtanga too, in that practice, like you don't practice on moon days. You don't practice when it's a full moon because they relate like, yes, we are like 70-80% water. That pulls the tides. That's also going to make your body off balance. And then on women's moon days, you don't practice on those days either. And it's this honoring of the natural world and our natural bodies and the practices as well. And those are days you could certainly like show up and sit in meditation. But honoring that your body might need different movements and different ways of engaging based off of the things that are happening within the world and within our bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, when you share this, reminds me of one of the Dharma talks that I have in Mindfulness with the Moon,
Do
which
you
is
mind just
devotion.
sharing what a Dharma talk is for those who don't know what that is?
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean by Dharma, so Dharma, it really just means the path or the way, right? My Dharma is a nature therapist. I truly
Mm-hmm.
believe, and there's so much more than that because I'm more than just my work, but it's my path, it's my teaching. Also, Dharma can mean teaching. It's a teaching
Mm-hmm.
of what what we're focusing on, right? So it's like, okay, here's the Dharma, and your Dharma in this moment at least is to create this incredible podcast to increase wisdom and connection with the wise one inside. Right? So we each have our Dharma. And without going into too many of the nuances of it, for me it's like this is the teaching of the day. So the Dharma talk, the teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes having those teachings roots the meditation in practice. And so one of the Dharma talks was about devotion. What are we devoted to? What are we choosing to do every day? Are you devoted to your meditation practice? Are you devoted to your Ashtanga practice? Are you devoted to spending time in nature? Are you devoted to your work? Are you devoted to your relationships? Are you devoted to your inner spiritual health? There's so many different things that we can choose to be devoted to. And having a consistent practice, I mean, I've been moving for the last several years consistently and creating a a consistent meditation practice, I swear, has been the only thing that has really supported me the most through these turbulent times. The grounded, like the we were saying briefly, Holly and I, before hopping on this podcast, like the having ground in the groundlessness of life, which is something
Mm-hmm.
that Pema Chodron, a teacher of mine, talks about on a regular basis. So I haven't had a consistent home. I haven't had a place that I get to continue to return to. I haven't had a consistent bed. Like so much of what we think of as grounding, I haven't had. I haven't chosen for one reason or another. I'm choosing it now, but it's been a journey to get here. And even when we do have the groundedness of a bed and a garden, there things still arise. And I got off my meditation practice for a little while after I finished Mindfulness with the Moon. I felt great when I did the series, and then I kind of slipped away, and I made a commitment every single day in June. I'm getting back in my meditation practice, and I feel so much more clear. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so helpful for me. And so it goes like that. We're really on it,
Mm-hmm.
and then we take some time off, and then we're like, wait, I have to recenter, I have to realign, I have to become grounded in the groundlessness again. I'm going to create a meditation practice again. So, and again, like it's not about why I haven't said this actually, so it's not again, but it's not about meditating every single day to say that we're good at meditating. It's about come like you said, what are we devoted to? Devoting ourselves to being quiet, to listening, to asking to be guided. For me, anyway, to be show me the way. Some people pray to a higher power, some people pray to a being, some people sing, some people, you know, have conversations. But I think one thing a friend has been talking to me a lot about is spiritual health and spiritual wellness.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks like showing up and being devoted to something beyond just when shit is hitting the fan
Mm-hmm. And why
every
do you
day.
think that's so important? Why do you think that devotion to something that isn't our bodies, a human being, a human thing or creation, why is that such a key component of overall well-being and wellness and spiritual wellness?
Mm. I have many things that I would say, but I want to know from your perspective, like why? Why do you think, Holly, that's important from from who you are?
Mm-hmm. For
Why?
me,
Why do we need that?
I think there are a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
And this isn't the answer, but I think the first thing is like one level is like, what a humbling reminder. Like,
Mm.
I like when it like takes the pressure, the weight off your shoulders. It's like I don't need to
Yes.
carry the world on my shoulders. The world can hold me here. Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
it for me. It comes into like that releasing my grip and letting go and falling into
Yes.
surrender. And then I
Mm-hmm.
think there is an element of it too for me. So much of this like oneness and connection and
Yeah.
I think that humbling is a great reminder that like there is something greater. I don't like the idea that I would be the greatest thing or that a human would. That's frightening
Yeah.
to me.
What?
But the
Like,
idea
hopefully
that
not.
something but I think like, the fact that it for me it's like something else is like that gives me comfort. And
Yes.
I really see this thread of seeing that we aren't that thing. But for me, I just see things as oneness. Like we are the divine as well. So that thing that is greater for me is in the earth, it's in you, it's in me, it's in whatever you might believe as well.
Yes.
Um, and that brings me closer to me. It brings me closer to you. It brings me closer to the world around me. So
Yes.
that's what it is for me. But I
Yeah.
think I notice the reason I ask this question is because I definitely feel myself going deeper and deeper into that spiritual world, which I've always felt
Yes.
connection to. But I notice like some people it's very easy to engage with this about, and others it's not. And I think
Right.
it is a part of our well being that doesn't
Mm-hmm.
often get a lot of light. And there, for good reason, for a lot of people, there's a lot of fear around spirituality and religion and trauma around those
Yes.
things.
Yes.
But I also want to lean into like, it's a famous quote. I can't remember by whom, but it's like, we are not human beings having a spiritual experience, we're spiritual beings having a human experience, is the way
Mm-hmm.
so
Mm-hmm.
if we're not
Sounds
tapping
like sounds
into
like
that,
Ram Dass or some
yeah,
beautiful
yeah,
creator
someone
like that.
wonderful like that. Yeah.
Yes, yes, I agree. And I think it's really important that you bring up the challenge that a lot of people can experience from organized religion, from saying that this is the way.
Hmm.
Um, and I think once, even the word prayer, people are like, wait, whoa, what do you mean by that? Which is why I say that can be song. That can
Mm-hmm.
be, sitting down and listening to yourself, which is really not yourself at all. I mean, a lot in a lot of the Buddhist traditions, this concept of no self is something that's practiced a lot. Like, can we just sit and take witness to the mean girl coach, to the different parts of ourselves that have the crying part that is active, to the one who's like, I got this, all of the different parts. And spiritual health and spiritual wellness is fundamental in our in the overall health of our world, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're not talking about spirit, when we're not talking about soul, when we're not talking about nature, when we're not talking about mind, and we're not talking about the body, like when we're not talking about this whole package,
Mm-hmm.
specifically in a therapeutic context, I think we're missing the the whole point of being here on this planet. Like, where did we come from? Great question.
Mm-hmm.
How is this happening? And I've been an existential philosopher my whole life, wondering how and why and what happens after we die and why am I here? And I remember looking at myself in the mirror when I was 6 years old and like pinching my face and being like, is this me? And like, what does that even mean?
Mm-hmm.
And then now taking these spiritual practices and like, maybe it's not even me.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just this body and soul and spirit that I've been gifted this go round, and it's my dharma, my teaching, my path to explore all of the different realms. And so I do that in my work. I support people with spirituality, and there's many layers to that. But starting with meditation and then working our way into psychedelic work, looking at the past, looking at where we come from, why we are who we are, and who we choose to be every
Mm-hmm.
day is a spiritual practice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I really like to lean into spirituality with like it's not about thinking we know the answers or even finding the answers. It's just finding
Mm-mm.
this connection to that oneness as we move through this lived experience. And it's not about the knowing, it's just like, what is this experience like for you right now?
Yeah.
Did you find mindfulness with the moon helped cultivate a deeper spiritual relationship for you? Did spirituality come into that practice? And how did that evolve for you?
I've been a questioner of spirit and faith, like I mentioned, when I'm looking at myself in the mirror, 6 years old. In mindfulness with the moon, it was such a deepening of my relationship with the cycles. And you talk about this oneness, and I'm so glad that I sort of re-asked you your brilliant question, because I had a very similar answer. It's like we need to have this spirituality and this connection with each other and ourselves and the earth, because we are all one. We really are. And I think that's why I love psychedelics so much, because typically, out of all of the sessions that I've done, all of the clients that I've worked with, that is the overarching theme. Oh my God, we're the same. I am the breeze. I am the river. I am a plant. I am the universe. I am a beating heart. And I am a soul and a spirit beyond that, as are you. And so for me, it's just been this natural unfolding of looking at myself with and each other, my clients and my friends and my family and the earth, as sentient beings that also carry God, that also carry prayer, that also carry messages and songs and wisdom. And the mission of the Makaranda method is to teach humans how to heal themselves through actively listening to the mind, body, soul, spirit, and nature to find peace in the present moment. That's it. Gotta have all those elements. To think that we are the the one and only, it's like you were saying, it's humble to remember that we're just a drop in the web.
Mm-hmm. And it's absolutely that remembering. This isn't new. This is just like coming back to that deep knowing within us.
Yes.
Thank you so much for taking time to dive into all of this with us today. Do you mind sharing how people can work with you, stay connected with you, support you and your work, and work with you?
Be honored to connect. And that's really just what this is all about. This whole life thing is connecting to ourselves and connecting to others. And so I invite you to visit my website, themakarandamethod.com. And then you can also follow me on Instagram. You can follow Mindfulness with the Moon on Spotify and on most platforms. And you can make a donation for that on our website as well, which is how we keep it going. Dana, Dana, is a Buddhist approach to gifting, where we just gift things when we've been impacted. So, maybe you want to gift something to Holly for hosting this incredible podcast of sharing so much wisdom. Maybe you'd like to give something to the Makaranda method to continue to allow for us to share these wisdoms and allowing to create this aspect of giving, because when we receive, it's the natural flow on the other side to give. So all of that are ways to stay connected. Thanks for asking.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to How the Wise One Grows podcast today. If this podcast has been meaningful in your life, it would mean the world if you could share an episode with a friend and follow us on your favorite streaming platform and on social media. And if you have the capacity, you can join the How the Wise One Grows Dream Team. There's a link in the show notes, and you can become a supporter of this podcast for as little as $3 a month. Supporting this podcast at any amount makes it possible and means the world. And so do your comments, shares, and reviews. Thank you again for making this possible. And until the next time, let's keep taking it one breath at a time.